Katie may be a few minutes late, so we'll just give it a give it a few minutes.
Okay, she's busy.
Yeah, I'm sure her schedule is insane. Between the administration's changing and all the stuff that's going on,
Yeah.
SolarWinds not the least of which. It's got to be a nightmare, and still got staff in and out based on COVID, etc. And we are live. The time shift may affect audience participation, but we're going to record it and we'll be able to replay. I see that we've got some attendees starting to pile in, so we'll give it a few more minutes. Thank you for doing this again, Allison.
No problem.
For the attendees that can hear me, we're just waiting on Miss Arrington to arrive. And once she does, we'll sort of do a quick introduction and get started. If you have questions, please feel free to put them inside the question and answer box, and we'll try to get to them at the end. How are you, Miss Arrington? You're still on mute, by the way.
I locked myself out of my office, left my cat card in there, so I had to run back.
That's a hell of a run, too.
A little winded. I'm like, oh crap, I can't be late for Terry.
I do appreciate you taking time out of your chaotic schedule, and I say chaotic very, very liberally. So I know it's got to be an absolute nightmare there these days.
It's been crazy. But
we've started the webinar. We're starting to get participants to the audience piling in.
Okay.
And so we'll go ahead. I want to be respectful of your time for both Katie and Allison. I am blessed. For those that can hear me, I am very, very blessed to have both the Honorable Miss Katie Arrington and Allison Wyckoff. Both of them are dear friends, former colleagues, and mentors of mine. And I appreciate them taking out the time to participate in this. I truly am blessed to have both of these people in my life to some degree or another. So this is really a pleasure for me. And both are absolute rock stars in their own right. So this should be a very lively discussion. And as we have folks continue to pile in, we'll just keep going. If you don't mind, we're gonna talk sort of about the cyber threat landscape a little bit, the historical view of it is and how it relates to the defense industrial base, and then we'll talk more specifically about the strategy for defending the defense industrial base.
Wait, I think you have to start the meeting on.
We already did.
Oh, okay. All right. So
okay. We are good to go.
Sorry about that.
No problem at all. And we'll edit out anything else. So we do have some participants piling in. So we'll start really quickly. And Allison, for everyone's information, by the way, the Honorable Miss Katie Arrington is the CISO for acquisition for the Department of Defense. And Allison Wyckoff is a senior threat researcher for advanced Tradecraft, nation state and e-criminal, et cetera, for IBM's X-Force, and is a resident expert in her own right. So Allison, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with a couple questions for you.
Sure.
SolarWinds, of course, has gotten a lot of oh, hang on a second. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I got texted saying that I did not start the meeting correctly, so I apologize. We're good. So when you look at SolarWinds, it's just the most recent example of nation state level activity and how it's affected the defense industrial base. But as you and I have spoken before, we act like this is novel or new, and it's not. And if you wouldn't mind, in a general, just sort of give us the historical context of this type of attack, where we've seen it before and its effectiveness, you know, that you've seen it and studied.
Sure. So SolarWinds obviously got a lot of airtime and should in its own right, based on the scale of the attack or impact. But supply chain attacks are really not new whatsoever, and they're also not limited to nation state operators. So if we think back to 2013, the Target breach, for example, the initial access vector for that was compromised credentials from their HVAC vendor. The adversaries in that case weren't nation state threat actors. They were criminal-based actors interested in stealing credit card data. Then we can go to CCleaner and NetSering in 2017. This was a more along the style of the SolarWinds attack, where weaponized updates in these respective pieces of software were used to compromise a very small subset of people who downloaded those updates. NotPetya is another example of a.
Wait until you got to that one.
I know. I mean, like, we can't talk about supply chain attacks and not talk about NotPetya, and I won't belabor that point, because I think we've all, and I get flashbacks of the pain that was NotPetya. But that again was a weaponized update for Ukrainian accounting software. Now, what we saw was there was a lot of collateral damage globally, but that's another example of supply chain attacks. And then more recently, there's a ransomware family called Sodinokibi, or Revo, which has been around since about 2019. And the initial access vector for that ransomware, at least initially, for many organizations, was through third-party IT software companies. So again, like, supply chain attacks aren't new. They aren't limited to nation-state operators. A lot of times the initial access vector for those third-party compromises is not all that sophisticated.
So let's pull the string here a little bit, and just to tease this out, and Katie, please feel free to jump in at any time. But we tend to focus on the extreme level of tradecraft for the lateral movement, which is cool. I mean, and I say cool respective, it's malicious, but the lateral movement tradecraft is impressive. However, but if you look upstream at initial vectors, would you speculate that the initial vector is probably a lot less sexy than the tradecraft used to do lateral movement?
Oh God, yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in the case of SolarWinds, we don't really know what the initial access vector was into SolarWinds. So there was a disclosure right after the initial news broke from the SolarWinds and an SEC filing that Office 365 was a part of the initial compromise, but we didn't get details behind that. But when we look at some of these historical compromises, we're looking at things like single factor passwords, phishing, things that are not all that sophisticated, or, like you say, sexy in terms of like how they're getting it. Like, we're not talking about, in a lot of cases, 0-day vulnerabilities that are allowing these adversaries in. We're talking about really simple social engineering techniques, or opportunities for us to kind of do better in terms of our network defense.
And I'll jump on that. By the way, Terry, we can all see your comment stream there, brother. Can you click that off? By the way, there you go.
Minimize
Still seeing that?
Yeah, we're still seeing that. No, there we go. Okay, so I couldn't.
That's
so
bad.
Yeah, it was hard. Allison, very nice to meet you. And I love the fact that you're out there researching and looking at our adversaries, right? And they're from all types. It's not just nation state, criminal, competition. I mean, people forget, like, we are supposed to be good to each other, but we're always not. And
I think I just want to interject really quick. And, the nation state type attacks always make the news because they're really,
that's not the majority,
though. No, typically what we're seeing on the network defense side of things, and in our incident response practice, is about like 80 to 85% of the incidents that we're responding to and what our clients are dealing with are not these nation state attacks. They're the ecrime, the commodity type attacks. Mm-hmm. So
I would say
yeah.
for us in the DoD, I mean, we get a non-petya, a SolarWinds,
Right.
you know, they happen, you look at them, it's cyclically. I mean, it takes a while to
Right.
develop a plan that was so detailed. It's not like you just, you know, you get a good, you know, ransomware with a good phishing schema and you're in, right? And that $250,000 to $5 million or $15 million ransomware attack is a hell of a lot more lucrative to the common cyber thief than, you know, spending the better part of, I'm going to assume 2 years working on this easy on SolarWinds with the intelligence and whatnot. But they're not, if we did the basics every day, right? And you change, you know, the CMMC, I know everybody's heard it to death. But if we did the basic things every single day and we understood that that was how we had to live, that the risk reduction strategies to exist on a cyber environment, which means your desktop, your laptop, your phone, the networks, the whole Internet of Things, is you have to do the simple stuff every single day. And when you don't, know that that's the day, because Murphy's Law is real, that's the day the adversary will find you. And what we're experiencing in the DoD is the better part of a decade, people just not understanding the basics, right? And I've talked about this ad nauseum when I get to events and I stand up and I didn't bring, I'm in the skiff areas, no phone today, hold my phone up, right? And I don't know about being a mentor, Terry, because I pray to God, right? Like I'm only 50. I don't want to be a mentor. Yeah. But being 50, right? I hold up my iPhone, which I use, right? I love my iPhone. But that technology was just inherent. I mean, I remember my first flip phone. This risk that, you know, we're sitting here with, it's not like anything else we've ever experienced where we were so gung-ho to jump into it. You know, even when a caveman or woman discovered fire, right? The first time they touched it, it hurt. For us, this really hasn't hurt yet, right? We haven't understood. We haven't had the full effects of a cyber war across the whole. So it's almost like until I would say the Department of Defense knew this was coming, you know, I would say in the previous 2 administrations, it's been top line level, big deal, right? But for industry to actually absorb and understand how critical it is, there hasn't been time. And I would just say over the past 2 years, more over COVID, right? When the pandemic started, and if you weren't doing the basics, and I will say, you know, in the Department of Defense, we did I would say a Herculean lift, because, you know, we were basically, you go to work every day. That's part of working in the Department of Defense. We don't do telework well. From a community that was all, you know, synced and in, you know, seats on bases and in facilities like the Pentagon, et cetera, to go to telework literally overnight was massive. But what happened in the commercial industry was even worse, right? So it was too hard to log into your VPN. So you sent information, you know, to your Gmail account or your Yahoo account. The amount of data that we just gave over in the first 2 to 4 months of the pandemic is nauseating. And it's because people weren't doing the basics, right? And you'd go home at night and you were on the same laptop or computer that your kids were using to go to school. You were using to do telehealth. You were Zooming, you were talking to anybody and everybody. We have to realize that people like Allison will always have a job. You know why? Because even when we fix something, right, and we do our truant best to do all the protections in the world, and if we move to a 100% zero trust environment, know that there is nothing 100% secure, nothing. And as you close one hole, what's electronic warfare, Terry? What do you do in electronic warfare?
Measure, countermeasure, measure, countermeasure.
And we haven't looked at that as businesses, right? That you are now in electronic warfare. You may not have realized it, but that is exactly what it is. You can call it, you know, there is espionage and there's warfare. You're at cyber war, and you should be as concerned as you would be going to war. I mean,
well, we've seen that, you know, with you know, code that has been weaponized, you have kinetic effects that can be realized very easily, and we have such an interconnected world that it's that way. But you brought up a point that I think we ought to pull the thread on a little bit. There's a reason that the Chinese space shuttle looked a lot like the US space shuttle, and it wasn't because they hacked directly into Department of Defense. That's the defense industrial base, right? And that information was gleaned from, and that's just a glaring example. I used to have a picture where I had the US space shuttle and the Chinese space shuttle, and go like, what happened to your cyber defense? And but that's been this way for decades. So when we talk about the defense industrial base and the need to protect it, there's been critics of the CMMC program, but you and I, and you are a large degree some of the author of the CMMC, but it's a necessary thing. But you've gotten a lot of pointed critics about it. What do you say to the critics of the CMMC program?
Well, first of all, open to any better solution, right? I didn't create this in a vacuum, right? It wasn't Katie Arrington, sat out, went into a bubble inside the Pentagon and developed this. I think it was, I would say, revolutionary on how the government went after doing something as radical as the CMMC and taking industry's hand and saying, I'm not doing it alone. You guys are coming with me, whether you like it or not. And the critics, large part is nothing's perfect. The CMMC model took in some basic principles. One, that we had to get to have cyber requirements in every contract, right? We had to understand that cyber had to be a baseline, foundational, because you can't do acquisition on top of anything if it's not secure. Cost, schedule, and performance hold absolutely no value if by the time you deliver it on time, meets the performance to the dollar, and your adversary or your competitor has it, what was the point? So it all has to have security baked into it. And that the varying standards, so yes, the DFAR rule 252-204-7012, which was stood up by President Obama's executive order in 2014, put into place in 2015, which is the NIST 800-171, which was born out of the 53, but that's a whole nother. Contractors were supposed to be implementing that within 2 years, and that we trusted. Everybody we trusted. We knew, for my life before this, I used to be a small business. So I understood very clearly how difficult it is to meet the demands of different agencies, even different services, right? And we all remember the days of CMMI, right? We're software development. Right. Well, do you remember the one, and I'm still a fan of maturity models, but I remember really specifically taking and getting my CMMI 3, and it was only on one program, right? Because it was program specific. And it really was, but my company, this is how we develop our software. This is the processes that we use, and shouldn't be good for all. That was ingrained in my head as a business owner that spent a copious amount of money. We wanted a model from the get-go that was going to be scalable and repeatable and auditable, and that it needed to take into consideration all the good work done by NIST, and Ron Ross will go down as one of my all-time favorite human beings in the world. What ISO 27001 had, what the NIST cybersecurity framework, what our allied partners were doing, and all of these things had common controls, right? Access controls, the families or the domains were all the same. So it only made business sense to put it into a model so that a company, because we were going to require third-party certification.
And that's the important part. That part is key.
In the world, this is no different than ISO, right? So if you're in manufacturing and you work in the Department of Defense, I ask you, tell me which one of your contracts doesn't have ISO 9000 in it. Tell me which one of your contracts you work on that you don't use cyber. Cyber, CMMC is the cyber ISO. And if I could have gotten the ISO 27001 updated fast enough, I could have done that, but I really wanted to make sure that this was something that was as economically sensible as possible. And for the critics, oh, this wasn't out there. Yeah, the FAR has had the cyber requirement in it for a long time. I'm sorry, you all just didn't grasp that. So it's making people accountable. So to the critics, I say, criticism is always good. You should always have someone else's lens. I, for the better part of a year, have said, it's great to tell me what you find wrong with it. How would you make it different? And I'm going to say this publicly, and I'm an SES now. And my mother raised me with a couple of key things, okay? A few things like you never put down something that you don't fear. No other reason in the world to do it. So if you fear it, you're putting it down.
Right.
And if you have a problem without a solution and you've come to tell me, I categorize that as whining. I tolerate whiners for nothing, right? If you think there's a problem, well, you should really come and think about the solution. So for the critics, I love that you opine about it. And I love the ones that blast me on Facebook and send me emails and whatnot. When you really want to have an objective conversation, come to the meetings.
Yeah, it's so much more fun to be a troll on the internet, though.
Just be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. And I think I've given my email out, my desk number out. I mean, it's not like I don't do my true best to respond to people, but it's here. The rule change has happened. It's gone into effect. Let's move forward. We have much bigger issues to opine over than this. This is happening.
But this is, so I think there's two components part of this that I think that need to be brought up. Number one, the audit portion of this is important because we've had to self-attestify for years, right? We've been self-attesting and we haven't made any progress. So I do believe a third party, fair and neutral party doing the assessment is a big component of this. Although I realize it's arduous, but it's an important part. And I hope we don't get rid of that because I think that's important. The second part is the DoD is leading the effort. I see where the GSA, STARS 3 contract are sort of leaning towards like leveraging the CMMC model. Where else in the federal government, it, of course, is huge and it's maturity models all over the map. Do you see the other parts of the federal government but coming along? And do you think it seems that cyber, it just sort of transcends administrations, or at least it seems to be a unifying rally cry. Do you believe
Absolutely.
we'll continue to gain that momentum under the new administration? And do we see these efforts in CMMC leading to other agencies and the federal government picking it up?
So the National Cyber Solarium was bipartisan. When I mean that, extremely bipartisan. It was stood up in 2019, the National Cyber Solarium report. Congressman Langevin and I can't remember Mike's, and I'm sorry, the senator. I will edit this out and put him back, but I'm sorry, it is escaping my mind right now. But he was an independent. So we had a Democrat and independent who chaired the actual commission. And this was during the previous administration. Mm-hmm. And the collective, and I would say this, right? Democrat, Republican, we all care about the same things. I mean, that there are the coming out has really been unified. How to solve the problem on cyber has been bipartisan support for a while, right? That's an easy one. So no, this isn't going away. And I do enjoy the trolls, it's gonna, no, it's not. We've invested, it's a rule change. But here's why it goes beyond. When we stood it up, we thought critically for a minute that if we started it, the CMMC inside the building, because we did, right? Remember, we have the DIB-CAC assessments. Right. We're doing those. That's part of the 7019 clause and the 7020 clause. If we didn't say, no, we need a nonprofit to handle it, because we don't want the taxpayer to have to go through the bureaucracy of having DHS, the Department of the Interior, the Department of Commerce to go work through the negotiation, the bureaucratic details to get to the CMMC PMO, to work all those agreements out. We wanted it just to go to a nonprofit that was outside of us, just like ISO. It's a nonprofit that the other agencies could reach in and use that. and it would spread across. And the Solarium report, and why I keep bringing this, that was one of the foundational elements. There are 6 sections to the National Cyber Solarium, which there has been bipartisan support in previous administrations and this one to make those things. And the section 4 of that report is that there needs to be a national cyber certification program, and that should be based upon the DoD CMMC. And the big thing is that the amendment, and if that happens, and I think it will happen this year, to amend the Sarbanes-Oxley Act to require entities to file cybersecurity ratings and reports in their filings, which will change the game. So all of, it's the AB was set up for that reason specifically. So the other agencies, there are at least 3, other agencies that want to impart the CMMC now. And what we have said is, please wait until we get through our pilots, the initial pilots, to make sure that we have worked all of the kinks out of it, right? That's the first thing. SolarWinds has we've taken this. All right, wait, would the model, anything in the model have made an impact to make SolarWinds not happen? Well, to make SolarWinds not as impactful, you would have probably needed a zero trust environment, right, to really be there. And levels 4 and 5 in the CMMC enforce a critical thinking about zero trust, but it's understanding how it all fits together. But no, absolutely. Our international partners, I'm doing another NTIB with our 5 Eye partners tomorrow, I think. They're already moving forward. So I just think the CMMC will grow. It will become the cybersecurity standard for the US. All good things start with a small little tiny seed.
No, and I agree. It's funny because I do read your trolls as well, and there's a fair amount of folks saying that this will just go away, it's going to die under its own weight, et cetera. But I know Katie Arrington much better than they do, and it's not just you. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a need that needs to be filled. I applaud you championing this, but as Allison was demonstrating, we've seen this activity over and over and over again, and we act like espionage is something new, and it's not. But let's talk a little bit, pivot a little bit away from nation state, and let's talk about the e-criminal networks for a second, because this is the other thing that's schlacking everyone with weaponized ransomware attacks, or not weaponized, but even monetarily driven. So Allison, real quick on the e-criminal groups, we've talked about this a lot. Give me a little bit of your view on the sophistication of e-criminal groups and what's running against conventional wisdom.
Well, I think the big misnomer is that e-crime groups are not sophisticated, and that is fundamentally untrue. I think if you look at a lot of the malware that e-crime groups use, that's got a scale on a much broader spectrum versus nation state groups who only are typically very narrowly focused on a very small amount of targets. We have seen time and time again that these crime groups are very well organized and well funded. There was an indictment that came out for one of the criminal groups. I think it was my time is so relative now in the land of COVID. It was last year or the year before, where some of these e-crime groups use Jira in the development of their software. Yeah. Like, think of how organized
that was 2019.
Is. Was it? Like I said, the time is so relative, but there's this misnomer that these are, these people in basements with hoodies on, which was it TrickBot last week? There was a video that came out of a takedown in the Ukraine. It was TrickBot. It was one of the big e-crime groups. I can't remember if it was TrickBot or not. That really kind of negates this part of the argument. But these are very well organized, very well-funded groups. A lot of times, these criminal groups even involve the muling, so the physical movement of people to collect the money. So this is not a unsophisticated type of attack whatsoever.
Oh no, so Alice, you couldn't have said it any the better, right? This is truly a network, a global network that preys on particular industries. I mean, you want to, you think about Bitcoin, right? And you think about, so the muling was, you know, we saw that. You'd be surprised all the stuff that but as Bitcoin evolved, right, and we're able to have this cyber currency, it's got even worse, right? Because you don't have to worry about trying to get somebody through a country to get to a drop site to get them back home with a big old wad of cash. You don't need to worry about breaking into the banking system. You just got, you know, Bitcoin, and you can, the cyber currency is just ramped it up so much. And the ransomware, right? That's, you know, we think back, and I'll say, we all remember the movie Office Space, right? And we all love that movie, right? But that you just can't. It's my bling. But you think about it, what the premise of the movie was what? Skimming off and funneling it. It really, that was the start. Like, that's how easy it was. The tactics have only gotten better. So, you know, nothing for nothing, but think about that, right?
It goes back to our fundamental point that we were talking about earlier, where when you look really upstream, whether it be the ecriminal networks and the social engineering attacks, whether it be nation state actors, they get in, and, you know, and Alice and I laugh. It's like, it's always email. You know, we act like someone, you know, broke in or got hired in these manufacturers and they got physical access to boxes. You don't even have to work that hard. Like, if your third string wins the NFL every time, you never have to roll out the first string. And so the problem is, we still have we lack fundamentals. I mean, the initial vector is always something that we could have prevented. Now we can argue. I know that sounds very simple. Obviously, it wouldn't work all the time if it was just snap our fingers, make it happen. But embarrassingly so, it's more often than not something that we've known for a while. There is countermeasures available, whether it be architecturally or training, or you know, even in appliance application. But there's been a body of knowledge that would have well reduced the amount that we see. And so that's why I'm also applauding your efforts in CMMC as a way to try to enforce that rigor to a degree that we now have to account for it. We can't just say we did it.
Well, here's what, you know, the thing, you know, both you and Allison, what is the number one denominator of a computer incident, cyber incident? What's the number one denominator?
What do you mean, besides the people?
The people.
Say the people.
The operators.
It's like, always the human.
It's the human, right? And so you think about small mom and pop shop, right? And God bless them, because we need them. This country was built on small business. Like, Ford didn't get to be Ford before it was like Ford. It starts small, gets big. The dry cleaner in your neighborhood, right? Why would they think? Right. So here's how your adversary is thinking. Okay. Take yourself out of being a good human being for just a moment. They want to know around. So I mean, the social engineering that they're able to get, right, through our Facebook, our LinkedIn, our Twitters, our shopping apps, you know, the adversary knows your color of hair, how often you like to go to eat at, you know, particular restaurants, your choice of, you know, drink, etc. They're paying attention to, so one of the things on the SolarWinds, that certain pay scales of certain political. So you don't think that they're not watching those individuals and where they shop? And you don't think the dry cleaner that person goes to isn't susceptible? Well, if I can get into the dry cleaners, right, which probably doesn't have much in the way of security, and that person's using their credit card, and I can get in there, well, then I can start. Right? I can get into manipulating that individual to the way I want, you know, blackmail, whatever have you. But it also works on the other side, right? You have to think about what you give out every day. And, you know, that thing, you know, what you give out, you get back 10 times fold, right? Really works that way. You give enough of your information out, you're giving enough information out to find the way back in. You know, simple things like somebody was saying something to me months and months and months ago, like, why don't you put your security credentials on your LinkedIn account? Why would I ever do that? Like, first rule of Fight Club is Why would you tell the adversary, hi, I'm somebody who thinks that really I know what I'm doing. Now, I appreciate the professional aspects, but I'm a government asset. No, I'm not putting out there what I know. Like, no. We have to think critically about things like that. And Allison, for you, when you look at the TTPs, have they really changed that much?
No.
No.
And one of the challenges that I have had for probably since I've been in the research field. So I spent the first half of my career on the network defense side of things, and the second half I spent on the research end of things. The last half has been really challenging because working for these organizations where we're trying to talk about, what our observations have been over the past, year or whatever through whether it be our incident response practice or, whatever, it hasn't changed all that much. So it's been really hard to make, these blanket statements about how the landscape has shifted when we're continually recommending the same things in terms of combating some of these threats. So, multi-factor authentication and, some sort of tool on the endpoint,
So
AV are the things that.
So Allison,
Yes.
For the people on right now, explain to them why multi-factor authentication is important.
Because passwords are going to get compromised. And if an adversary can get into your environment with a valid set of credentials, that lateral movement that we talk about, like how do you tell when someone that's authenticated to your network is actually that someone and when they're not, when it's compromised? And MFA, multi-factor authentication, protects those credentials. And I know because I have been there, it is a pain to implement. People don't like it. Who stop changing it, you're making it more difficult. The whole who moved my cheese kind of conversation when we're dealing with the regular end user, not the security folks. But it is so, I think it's so much easier now than it was 10 or 15 years ago. I mean, I'm not going to speak for you two, but I know I have about, 15 or 16 different apps on my phone for all the things that I log into that provide that additional factor in addition to my password for logging in. And I have it on everything. Things that people are like, really, Allison? Yes. Everything. Even the things that people think like, why would you turn that on for like Pinterest or something? Doesn't matter. It's on. Like if it's an option, it's on. And if it's not an option, I really question my subscription to that particular service.
You can never. So one of the things, and this is for everybody watching, I know this seems somewhat, I would say immature or I went on, not immature. It's just really, it's this easy. So on the start of the pandemic, I was working on the FEMA task force. So I was locked into my, world for 3 months and didn't see my family, but logging onto Facebook, right? And I used all my stuff to log in. And I do have Facebook because you have to use risk reduction strategies. Doesn't mean you don't do things. You just have to import risk reduction strategies and know that, you post a location, you're posting a location. Think about it, right? They know where you are. But anyway, one of my friends from high school was, it's such a depressing time. Let's go back and remember where, better times. What was the street you grew up on? What was your favorite pet's name? What's your favorite season? Now, people are doing it and they're posting it and they're posting it and they're posting it. And my first question is, oh, no, because how much does a password breaking software cost? $25? All they're doing is importing all those keywords in and running them through to see if they can break your password. So multi-factor authentication is because you as the human do silly things. You don't mean to, but you do. And even when you go out to like the 8th or the 10th character in a password, that just is another, 20 or 30 minutes on a password breaking device. It's not that hard. There are only so many characters, Ching, ching, ching. Sorry, I could go down forever on the basic stuff.
We're all on the same page, I think. The MFA, it's such a need, such a need.
So let's talk a little bit. So one of the reasons I gravitated to the company I'm working at, Polarity, was the problem of disparate data sources. We have data everywhere.
Mhm.
And we've tried solving it with data oceans and data lakes and cobbling together. The Defense Department builds, monumental things. The Army has their data lake process. Everyone's trying to consolidate data to try to divine information. There's two challenges with that. Number one, I've yet to see it work. Number two, if you bring all the data together, that's great, but the answer is only important if you ask the right question. So when we look at the problems of sharing data, not only just the raw telemetry of Tradecraft, but of what happened, and I think we've done a pretty good job, sort of with on the commercial side, but in the process of understanding what went wrong, we tend to go into CYA mode. I think culturally, we tend to want to cover our butts, and there's a very number one, financial implications of stocks crashing, culpability, what it does to your budget if you're a government agency, et cetera. You see the absolute enduring scrutiny, or the painful scrutiny that gets applied. So what do you think about overcoming some of those challenges, Katie, as far as how do we get transparent without revealing state secrets? I know, because we should be learning again, it's basic blocking and tackling we're failing at, and do we do a better job? I know we have the I6, et cetera, but what do you think about sort of disparate data sources and how we start to do that more effectively?
So the adversary, and we can use China, right? And then point blank, they tag me. They have been pulling in disparate data sources for many years and compiling the data, right? So our big concern of, I can't share this with you, assume it's already been exposed. Yeah. Right? So why CMMC is important, and why it was really important for the Department of Defense internally to understand this, is that not all security is equal, right? That's why we have a maturity level, and we're saying not everything needs to be protected to the same level. If you do the basics, you're going to buy down your risk substantially, right? And you buy up the uncertainty of the adversary getting in. And that delta, we do great, right? So as to Allison's point, your password, why you have it, and you buy down the risk every single time of using something, you buy up the uncertainty the adversary can get to it. Hiding in plain sight is not something that I think that we need to realize has been going on, right? So are we overclassifying too much and spending way too much money trying to protect what we know has already been lost?
Right.
And not enough protecting the things that are the most critical. And the protecting the data lakes and the data centers and all, I get it. I think culturally where we'll be in 5 years from now is that we will move away from, and Allison, if I'm incorrect, you or Terry, because you're in the industry, I'm away from it. We'll move from, instead of doing password or VPNs, we'll be doing strict end-to-end encryption, and really pushing that button that we have to remove the human element of exfilling the data that is trying to be secured, and ramping up the storage of who gets in access to, right? I think it's the zero trust environment really, I think, is going to become, you reduce the risk of something happening by really minimizing how many access points you have, and covering down on the ones you've got, is the only way I see it. And the overclassification, we have done, it's really had the reverse effect. And with that being said, we have to have better protocol on how to transmit the data. The data storage isn't the problem. We're not losing. Very few are getting actually into the data lakes. They're getting into people accessing the data lakes, and we have to focus on how to make that stronger. But did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's philosophically, I'm a big believer in zero trust. Micro segmentation is important, but and those are also problems of today's environment. I think we have to look at outliers as well. And I do think we're not as transparent as we could be on sort of the TTPs, as far as
Well, I think that one of the things that we need to make sure everybody understands is threat is not a 4-letter word. It is not a bad word. Like
Yep.
telling me and telling the community what threat is. I say this on a lot of my, when I talk about the industrial base, one team, one fight. Listen, kids, if it's happening to one of you, it's happening to all of you. Share the threat. We in the department, we are working towards getting better ways to flow down the threat. The challenge that I would say is that where we are right now, even if I flow it down, I don't know that small business would even know what to do with it. Right? How do you get the person to understand? All right, so you could either dial into the NSA call, you could use DC3, you can use DICE. There's a litany of different areas you can go and get threat. But what do you do with it? And so you're telling me there's a problem. Now what? Where do I go? What do I do? I think that's where the education part of this is okay, you should probably not depend on the IT person in your shop to be your cyber person.
Yep. It's interesting.
It's a team
dilemma.
sport. It's a team sport. It really is. And I don't think I really appreciated that until I moved into a space where I was supporting a bunch of clients, just realizing you can't do it all by yourself. The mom and pops, even the mid-sized companies, you need to have trusted third parties to help you distill these threat reports into, okay, well, this is great, but this is so theoretical for me, IT person who has to apply patches and do 10,000 other things. Like, just tell me what I have to do. And for me, that's where I think having a couple trusted third parties, whether it be an IBM or whomever, to help you figure that out, because I'm expensive. You don't want to have someone like me on your staff if you're in an IT shop, but it would be great to have someone like me, or to contract with a company who has someone like me who can boil down the SolarWinds threat into the 3 things you need to know, or whatever it is.
Well, and the shameless plug here, one of the hard parts about the consumption of intelligence is having it at the point in time you need it, where it's curated and it's pragmatic. Like, how do I take a lot of that? Oh, that's neat stuff about China Tradecraft, but then how do I actually apply that to my environment? And solutions like Polarity go after that. But I mean, and I'm not just, there's lots of ways of doing that, but that is a fundamental hurdle, is how do I take very esoteric information and apply it pragmatically? And there is a hurdle there. And I do agree with you, Allison, that I couldn't afford you either, right? I mean, at the end of the day, people like Allison are very, very expensive, and they're hard to retain on staffs because of this. And quite honestly, getting their information out of her head into the mid-size or small company, or even in small agencies, by the way, that they could use that kind of information is difficult. So last question for both of you, because I know we're going to run out of time here, and I want to be respectful, especially of Miss Arrington's time.
What time are we going to? 12:30?
12:30.
All right, so I'm going to do a shameless plug right now before you go to the last question. When we created the CMMC model, it was intentionally created with the thought that the small businesses more than likely would never be able to organically do all of the requirements in level 3, 4, or 5. Right. That they would have to go to third-party product providers to gain that. People like Allison and people like Terry, right? Allison would get bored in one company, in one agency, because her brain's moving at a bazillion miles an hour. You want somebody big thinking and out there researching, like going feet. There is no shame in looking at cybersecurity products, secured cloud service providers to help build your perimeter, to build your security. The reason we created CMMC level 2 was really to help the small and the innovative and non-traditional companies. I came from your world. Remember, I'm a defense contractor to begin with. I understand the B&P, right? It's bid and proposal, my P win. I'm level 1. To get to level 3, there's a huge delta. It's 1 to go from 17 controls to 130. How do I bridge that? How do I program or resource it? And how do I do it, right? Is it going to be, am I going to bring in these pieces and parts to get to that need? But there is absolutely no shame in products to support. do your due diligence, but know that nothing is 100% secure. And that the reason that zero trust environments are more, you bring in products, right? But you always have a backfill, right? You have option A, B, and C. The likelihood of an adversary getting through A, B, and C is highly unlikely. You've opened that aperture up. You've bought down the risk and bought up the uncertainty. But I hope people don't try and do it alone, and that you get in with communities of interest and you disseminate the threat. And then you have somebody on your account to say, okay, this is the person to help me. We did this in the DoD by making security an allowable cost. So in the CMMC model, we're looking for you to increase your rate because we want you to build in security to your rate. It is an imperative. So you can pay for products and services. Sorry.
No, and I appreciate that, because I think that it's important to get clarity of purpose as well, because a lot of this looks very, very bureaucratic. But again, it's to pragmatically improve. The last question is let's try to think a little bit forward. We tend to concentrate. You go to war with the army you have of today, and eventually you're going to be fighting an entirely different war with old tools. When we look at the technologies around deepfake, we're talking about human beings at the center of these problems, and you look at the sophistication. You could go to the website, you're like, is this a real person.com, or you look at the deepfake videos that are on TV. You now have deepfake voice, where anybody can sample enough of Terry McGraw to make me sound and say like I've done anything. So if you look at not the ones and zeros, but the ability to then emulate people in the environment, what do you think about that for the cybersecurity defense posture? Have we started to think future vulnerabilities that and where we're going to sort of start shoring up defenses?
Oh God! Well, as a researcher,
a loaded question. So
no. Well, I mean, you all should have at Christmas time paid attention to the Queen Elizabeth's speech, right? There was hers, and then there was the deep fake, and to have it done that quickly is what bothered me more than anything. We've known about deep fake, but the fact that almost within a minute of her finishing, that deep fake was out. How, right? But no, Allison, you start with that on the threat vectors and how it's changing, and I'll double back.
I'm gonna go back to what we're actually seeing, and it's so not sophisticated and to that level yet. With that said, like, this field changes at such an alarming and rapid pace. Like, I think about the things that we were seeing a couple years ago, just in terms of some of the malware, like, let's say, in terms of its sophistication, from both the ecrime and nation state actors. It has changed exponentially since then. In terms of the use of deep fakes, I think we will see it, but as organizations mature. So there's got to be a need for that type of technologies. Like you said, Terry, why would you put in the first string when the third string works fine? And what I'm seeing, unfortunately, on the research side of things is while organizations have gotten incrementally better, the threat actors have really not had to iterate all that much to move the needle to that kind of level.
That's a great point. And you and I talked about this on stage a lot. But the reality is these things are out there. And although the third string still wins the Super Bowl, there's new weapons being employed. And I think it's important for us to talk about it, because it's measure, countermeasure, measure, countermeasure. And even though we're not seeing it in the wild yet, I worry about
not broadly in the wild. Yeah. I mean, it's there. We're seeing it, obviously.
Not until the first wife brings her husband to court for cheating on her by a deep fake, then it'll really be important. Sorry, but we have to remember that it's as bad. We constantly are thinking about new and different ways that we could, use current technology against us. And that is the job in the Department of Defense and the IC, the intelligence community, NSA, cybercom. We've invested, billions and billions and trillions of dollars into this. So emerging, new threat landscape, things like deepfake, those are so sophisticated to do. That's like really something when you think about it, you want to have somebody on a mass way, in an election, a deepfake speech that might, for the most part, they're going to do more damage hitting the ransomware. I mean, from the amount of ransomware attacks that I'm aware of, right? There's more money in that than in the budget.
Yep.
And you think about it, right? As a total US nation, the defense budget last year was $738 billion with a B. We lost about $600 billion in IP theft, data loss, straight up cyber espionage, ransomware, having to go back and do the patches on the Microsoft 10. That was not cheap, right, folks? That costs money. When that stuff happens, you have to pay people to do that on contracts in the DoD, right? Patches, is that in your contract? Oh, nope. Okay, so how do we've got to build it in. We have to think all of this stuff has a cost. And that's why, the senators are bipartisan, and congressmen and women are bipartisan in saying, how do you make them accountable when they do something wrong? How do you make them accountable? Because it's costing the taxpayer.
Right.
You gotta, it's that big, because we're spending a lot of money to work, to get and have the big thinkers thinking about things like deepfake and, other things, right? Mm-hmm.
Do you think we'll ever see a day where there's a Sarbanes-Oxley type thing for cyber?
I think the amendments are now. I think. Oh yeah, I think it'll happen in 20. I think in 21. Without a doubt, so what they're looking at, right, is what's the point of putting that into Sarbanes-Oxley? The ultimate goal, right, is what you use in an SEC filing or a merger and acquisition is you're evaluating the risk of the person that you're investing in or you're working with. So cyber, what does that mean? The CMMC, your security rating score, if you don't know it today, if you have a public facing IP address, you have a rating score that is based on what the networks, the sensors on the network see as data flow. That ultimately, I think those will be used to create the actuary tables for cybersecurity insurance, because there really isn't anything today that you can put your stamp on. And just like, and I'm going to say it, I've said it 1,000 times. You look at when we drive our cars, we have an assumed risk on the highway because we're on it together. You learn risk reduction strategies in driver's ed. You're tested at your maturity level by getting your driver's license, and you're monitored by your insurance. Your insurance is going to show how well you're deploying those risk reduction strategies every day. CMMC is your driver's license for the information superhighway. And I think that's where the end goal is going to end up being. People get really crazy when I say that, but ultimately it's going to be, the C-suite is going to become more involved in cybersecurity, I guarantee, over the next year than they have ever been, ever. And to a small business, if you're listening today and you're in the DoD and you're thinking about the CMMC, you better bring your COO, your CFO, and your CEO into the room, because those are the people that really need to understand what's at stake. Your IP, your brand gets tarnished by something, by, and you said it earlier, putting information out there and, the brand identity. You have got to understand that's what's at stake. And you have to do the basics every day.
The consequences are dire. I mean, I read, I don't know who it was quoting, someone produced a statistic that something like 60% of small businesses that are attacked with ransomware will fold within a year, because the cost of recovery is just so high. Even if you paid the ransom or not, people think that you're out of the woods.
You have to rebuild a network.
You got to rebuild everything, and you just keep adding scale to that depending on how far it affects. I'll leave the last words to my guests, two of my favorite people. Allison, what do you think what's next? What's your top three things you wanna leave the audience with in our last 2 minutes?
That's such a pointed question. MFA, if you don't have it, you've got to do it. That is just
no-brainer.
without fail, like that will make your life so much easier, even though your end users might hate you initially. And two, like find somebody that you can work with, like a third party, because it's this, like I said, team sport. You can't do it by yourself. And there are so many different types of organizations out there, whether it be an ISAC or a paid relationship, that can help you kind of wrap your head around what's going on.
And help that risk assessment. Miss Arrington, and I don't mean any disrespect calling you Katie, by the way.
Please call me Katie. No, please. You know me too
I
long, brother.
I love the honorific though. It makes me feel so cool to say I know Miss Katie Arrington.
So I was made an honor. I was a state legislator. That's how long I've had my honorable. But I never. You're the only person who still uses it, and I love that you do.
It's well, hey, you are. When I said you're a mentor, and I meant that because you're quite an accomplished person, both in commercial and government, and we've known each other for a very long time, and I've always appreciated watching.
I knew him when he was in the Army.
Yeah, I know.
That's long ago.
That is a long time
ago.
It is. So last word to you, Honorable Miss Katie Arrington. What do you want to leave the audience with as the last takeaway?
Allison said it probably the best, right? You're not going to do it alone. Teamwork, communication. But in the kind and honorable words of General Honore, keep it simple. You do the basics. I know. It's if you do the basics, you have a much better chance. And don't be afraid to reach out and say, I can't do this alone. I need help. Because like I said, one team, one fight. We in the Department of Defense depend, 100% on you, your company being an enduring capability, because you are the national defense. I just write up contracts, I get acquisitions, I write policies, schedule deliverables. I don't build anything. Without you, we have nothing. So that's the imperative, right? And the country is as crazy as it may seem. That flag is the best in the entire world. And it's worth it. This is worth it. Sorry, I love it's.
We're on the same page. I appreciate both of you taking out a precious time to be with us in this. I will probably slice and dice the idiot part of me leaving my Slack channel up for the world to see. The marketing folks will actually probably excoriate me, and we'll probably cut that little piece out. But I do appreciate your time. This is always a great discussion. I'd love to reprise this sometime with the topic of your all's choosing. At the end of the day, it's always fun to talk to both of you.
One thing I would like, you want to have another one? Supply chain, right? Supply chain. My next thing, is CMMC was one little piece. Supply chain and zero trust are the two words.
Yep, I loved it. I'm taking that as a calendar appointment. I'll schedule you in a quarter to talk about that.
No, absolutely. It's an imperative.
Outstanding.
Allison, what a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
And Terry, no offense against your gender. It's lovely to see a woman in cyber. It's, we're growing in numbers. Not to say one is better than the other. It's just nice to see.
I agree completely.
I would say that both of you are mentors, we should be using you all as the epitome and something to emulate in our youngsters of any gender.
Thank you. All right, must go.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Bye.